Welcome back to Proxamer, everybody, and today we're going to be looking at how to fight the infamous Chaos Daemons as Craftworld Eldar. Chaos Daemons, of course, is a new codex that just came out, and to be honest with you, the demons needed it. They were one of the worst factions in the game at the time, and now, with this new codex, they rank among the best. And of course, that comes down to, in my opinion, two main mechanics that the demons have now, which is their improved deep striking ability, and that's something they've had for a while, but it was never that great. Now it's revamped and better than ever. And of course, the dreaded demonic save, which is basically an unmodifiable save that all demon units get. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. So a quick overview of the video, we're going to be looking at the Chaos Demon army-wide special rules and what to expect from Chaos Demons. We're going to be looking at the most common Chaos Demon units and what units and weapons are effective against them. And lastly, we're going to be looking at in-game tips and counters to demonic units or things to watch out for in general when fighting demons. Now, the first special rule we come across is demonic invulnerability. So this is their demonic save. So basically every demon ignores AP or any modification to their saving throw. However, this does not ignore mortal wounds. So you can still do mortal wounds and ignore these types of saves. And each demonic save has two values, one at ranged and one in combat. And typically the one in combat is weaker by about +1. So a typical value you might come across commonly is a 4+, 5+, which is essentially a 4+ against range attacks and a 5+ in melee combat. However, typically you don't want to be in melee combat with demons because they are combat oriented, which is probably why they have a worse combat value to kind of even it out a little bit. Now, while this is a very powerful ability, it certainly has its limitations. You're never really going to see outside of Tzeentch a 3+ demonic save in any category, and even Be'lakor himself does not have a 3+ demonic save in either combat or against shooting. So most of the time, you're going to be getting a 4+ or a 5+ at ranged or in combat. And again, Tzeentch units are the only ones that actually have a 3+ demonic save against shooting. But to make up for this, they have a 6+ save in combat. And essentially what this means is that although you won't get any AP or armor penetration against demonic units, most of their saves are going to be pretty mediocre or basic anyway. So mass fire is going to still be effective at killing them. The second army-wide special rule that they have is called Manifestation. So this is basically an improved deep striking. And basically, demons, all demons, can manifest or deep strike as reinforcements. So the thing about this manifestation is that there are many ways for demonic units to get actually within 9 inches of your units for easy charges out of reserve. So let me give you a quick example. And then we'll kind of talk about all the different ways in which demon units can come in from reinforcements and charge you very easily when they come out. So the first way is being close to a unit with the Warp Locus special rule or keyword. Now, basically this is reserved for higher level HQs, named characters, and things like this, or the Herald of Slaanesh. But here's the thing. Be'lakor himself, which is a very common pick in a lot of lists, especially tournament lists that you'll see, and you'll probably see this being picked in a lot of games, Be'lakor himself, has the Warp Locus keyword. So that means that if Be'lakor moves up and he's within, let's say, 4 inches of a enemy unit, so he's within 4 inches of one of your Craftworld units, enemy reinforcements can come in near him within 6 inches as long as they're outside of 6 inches of enemy model. So basically this essentially gives a +3 inch threat range to those enemy models. So instead of having to roll a 9 to get in to combat out of reinforcements, enemy models only need to get in on a 6. So this is extremely powerful. This basically means that units coming from reinforcements won't have to wait a turn. And in fact, this isn't just on one unit. This is every unit that comes in within 6 inches of Be'lakor or a model with the Warp Locust special rule. So this could potentially be 3-4 units of demons coming in around Be'lakor and charging your army all together and performing a massive alpha strike. So it is something you have to look out for and you have to prepare to screen out early on in the game. Now, I also mentioned 2 other ways in which demon units can come in closer than 9 inches. One of those is if you happen to be in their deployment zone. If you are in the Chaos Demon player's deployment zone, basically they can land just a little bit outside of 3 inches of you. So let's say that, for example, you are trying to do behind enemy lines or something like that. A Chaos Demon unit can come in within, well, just outside of 3 inches and charge you. So in this way, Chaos Demon players have a great layer of defense against some of our fastest units like Vipers, Swooping Hawks, and things like that. So that is something you guys are going to also have to watch out for when playing demons, is this special rule. Just keep in mind that if you are in the enemy deployment zone, they can bring in reinforcements just outside of 3 inches of you and assault you very easily. And of course, the last way that Chaos Demons can get into combat with you right out of reinforcements is the following rule. So if the enemy unit is neither wholly within your deployment zone nor within your opponent's deployment zone, and more than a number of inches away from each enemy unit equal to the current leadership characteristic of that enemy unit, to a maximum of 9 and a minimum of 3. So essentially what this means is that most units will have a pretty low leadership, right? So let's say that we're using an Eldar unit and that's leadership 8. So instead of having to be outside of 9 inches of that unit, demon units can deep strike within 8 inches of that unit. So that's pretty severe. Now, keep this in mind as well, that a lot of demon abilities actually reduce your leadership as well. So let's say that there's a demonic unit within 6 inches of one of your Swooping Hawk units, right? So instead of being able to come in within 8 inches, now that demonic unit coming from reinforcements can come in within 7 inches, making it a very easy charge on your unit. So you really have to make sure that when you are going against Chaos Demons that you are aware of this and make sure to keep your army tight and well screened if possible. And of course, one of the universal special rules that demons have is the demonic terror aura, which basically negates 1 leadership from your units that are within 6 inches of a demonic unit and subtracts 1 from any combat attrition tests. So the combat attrition tests are not that big of a deal. What is a big deal is the -1 leadership, because this helps demons deep strike closer to you. And again, demons can deep strike closer to you depending on your unit's leadership. And if you guys thought that was a lot, Chaos Demons also get the Warp Storm ability. So basically, just like Strands of Fate, at the start of every battle round, you can make a Warp Storm roll. So to do this, you roll 8 dice, and for each 4+, you gain a Warp Storm point, and those Warp Storm points can be spent on a various amount of army-wide effects, some of which are general to all the Chaos Gods, and some of them are specific to certain Chaos Gods. So let's go into some of these Warp Storm effects, because I think understanding these is really important to understanding how to fight Chaos Demons and what to expect. So the first one is Descending Shadow, and this is basically for all gods. This is what we would call unaligned for Chaos. So no matter what kind of Chaos army you're playing, you can use this, and it's one of the most powerful in my opinion. So basically, this gives the army an army-wide -1 to hit outside of 12 inches. So it essentially gives every single demon unit dense cover outside of 12 inches. So again, and the positive to this is it's not actually dense cover, so ignores cover effects are not affected. This is a army-wide -1 to hit from range attacks. So this is very powerful and really reduces shooting's efficiency for a turn, and it's very easy to achieve, because it really only costs 3 Warp Storm points, and if you're rolling 8 dice, chances are at least 3 of those are going to be a 4+. So this is a very easy way for demonic armies to prevent their units from getting shot up early in the game. The next one is a Tzeentch specific ability, and it is called Deluge of Fire. So basically, Deluge of Fire improves Tzeentch's units' ballistic skill by 1 and helps them hit more often, but it is a little bit harder to get off as it does cost 4 Warp Storm points, which is average, but sometimes you won't actually be able to get this off. Because of that, you might roll a little bit below average and not be able to use it. Mesmerizing Dance also costs 4 Warp Storm points, and it basically allows Slaanesh units to always strike first in that fight phase. So this is really powerful, especially over 2 rounds of combat, and not much will survive to strike back. And this makes Slaanesh units very fast, very deadly, and able to honestly outpace the combat of Eldar units, even Howling Banshees. Because remember, Howling Banshees only strike first when they charge, and this allows Slaanesh units to essentially fight first regardless of whether they charged or not. Fury of Khorne is another ability specific to Khorne. It basically gives Khorne units an extra attack, so this isn't that big of a deal, honestly, because in most cases, Khorne units will destroy anything they charge into anyway, but it does give a decent amount of extra army-wide damage, so you do have to be aware of this. This is especially deadly against tougher units like Wraith Blades and stuff like that may not actually die to a Khorne unit charging in, but with this Warp Storm power in effect, they're going to be taking a lot more damage from those Bloodletters. So this is one of the effects that I find really effective, and I think it's probably underestimated a little bit, but it's really good. So this is basically what it does. It's called Dark Hallucinations. This is something you really have to watch out for to be able to prevent. So while within 12 inches of a Slaanesh unit, if you start to perform an action, your opponent can attempt to deny it. So if they roll higher than your unit's leadership on 2d6, the action fails, and your unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. On top of this, it only costs 2 Warp Storm points, so it's very cheap. Now, here's the reason why I don't think this is talked about too much at the competitive level, because it only has a 12-inch range. So essentially, and it also requires you to be starting an action. So a unit that is already performing an action cannot be affected. But here's the thing, right? Competitive players will make sure that they are out of the range of this ability, right? They're going to make sure that they're outside of 12 inches when they start their action. However, if you're a newer player or a player that doesn't face Chaos Daemons that much or doesn't know about this, you might not actually make sure that your unit is outside of 12. So do be aware of this. Make sure that if you're going against Slaanesh or the enemy army has any Slaanesh units in it, that you are outside of 12 inches so that you basically aren't affected by this. And lastly, I did want to cover the Banner of Blood, which is a stratagem that is available to Khorne. Khorne is a very popular competitive army right now because it just has so much charge range, it has so much hard-hitting close combat power, and it has a lot of benefits going for it. So this stratagem allows a demonic Khorne unit with an icon to roll an extra d6 on its charge and discard the lowest result. So if you combine this with things like demonic manifestation and the kind of deep strike rules that are available to Chaos Daemons, you start to get a picture of pretty much guaranteed turn 2 charges out of reserve. And again, when you get those charges off, it can be absolutely devastating. So this is only one command point and really helps Khorne get units into combat, especially out of reinforcements. So basically, in general, when you're fighting Chaos Daemons, you should expect 3 things. 1, a heavy emphasis on melee combat, and again, 3 out of the 4 gods are combat-oriented. You should expect a strong reserve game, so they have great deep striking that can get within 9 inches with plenty of additional charge range and abilities that can help them get in as well. And lastly, you can expect your AP to be completely useless due to the demonic save. So those are the 3 things to expect when fighting Chaos Daemons. And luckily, as Craftworld Eldar players, although it may not seem like it at first, we actually have a lot of answers to the problems that Chaos Daemons pose to us. So for example, the AP issue with the demonic save. Craftworld Eldar have some of the best low AP, high volume of shot weapons in the entire game. Scatter lasers, 6 shots, strength 6, AP nothing, is the perfect weapon for killing most Chaos Demons. Again, Slaanesh and Tzeentch units are going to be wounded on 2s, and Khorne and Nurgle units are going to be wounded on 3. So it has a very high chance to wound with a lot of shots, and it's damage 1, which is just fine because most Chaos Demon infantry units only have 1 wound to begin with. Nurgle, of course, being the exception to that with 2 wound infantry. As for their heavy emphasis on melee combat, Eldar have a lot of misdirecting abilities and easy screening options, whether it be the Wave Serpent, the Viper, Rangers to screen out your units, or the many kind of different abilities that we have to get away from combat in the first place, including a very high movement and battle focus, as well as the Warp Spider's ability. The list just goes on. And again, we have a lot of ways to get out of melee combat. We have a lot of ways to deal with the demonic save. And again, I didn't even mention most of those things. I just mentioned the scatter laser, but we have a lot of other high volume fire units. And we have a strong ability to play around reserves. So because we're Eldar, we have high maneuverability, but we also have the access to the forewarned ability, which allows us to shoot an enemy unit coming out of reinforcements. So what sort of units could we expect in most Chaos Demon armies, and what weapons and strategies are effective against them? So basically, we have these units here that I feel are the most common that you will come across. And that is the Bloodletters, which all Khorne armies will have. You have the notorious Flamers. You have Plague Bearers, Demonettes, Pink Horrors, Seekers, and lastly, the one and the only Be'lakor. So looking at the Bloodletters first, they have a pretty good offensive stat line with a powerful weapon. Although against Eldar units, it's a little bit overkill, so that plays to our advantage. And they're not very tough. If you look at them, they're only toughness 4 with a 4+ demonic save, and they're very vulnerable to high volume fire. So scatter lasers, warp spiders are very good against these guys, etc. Swooping hawks as well. So a thing that I like to do against Bloodletters is basically run my Farseer within 12 inches of a unit of Shroud Runners or a unit of Warwalkers that has scatter lasers. And when enemy reinforcements come in, a unit of 10 Bloodletters, for example, using the forewarned stratagem and just basically wiping those Bloodletters off the face of the earth as they come into the board. So a very easy way to get yourself a 130-point advantage right off the bat. Warp Spiders are also very good against these guys. Basically, Warp Spiders can't really be caught by these guys because they have kind of a low movement 6. So as long as the Warp Spiders fire within 12, battle focus back, they really should never be able to be charged, especially with their flicker jump ability that they can just use to essentially escape combat each and every time. So Warp Spiders, probably the MVP at kiting Bloodletters around the battlefield, but also scatter lasers for the sheer amount of damage that they can cause to Bloodletters coming in from reserve. So Flamers are next, and Flamers are, well, they're pretty flaming. So here's the thing about them. They're fast and resilient to shooting, so they're not very easily killed with conventional high AP weaponry. They have an insane weapon that auto hits and on average will get about 6 to 7 hits each at strength 5, AP -2. Luckily, here's the thing. They're very short range, so if they are coming from reserve, which they probably will, they're pretty easily able to be screened out or, again, forewarned with the powerful shooting unit. So something, again, like Shroud Runners or Warwalkers with scatter lasers could very easily pick these guys apart as they come into the battlefield. So, however, if you don't have this available, be prepared to lose one unit of something if you don't have yourself properly screened. And even if you do, they might kill a ranger unit, which is actually kind of the best case scenario. If you do lose a ranger unit to these guys deep striking in, that is an absolute blessing in disguise, because basically what can happen at that point is you can just kill the Flamers. Now, they're not that tough. 3+ save, I get it, but they're only toughness 4 and they only have 3 wounds. So a lot of things can actually kill them pretty easily. Now, one thing I really like against these guys is a combination of Swooping Hawks with the suppressive fire Exarch power and Warlocks with singing spears. So basically this interaction is really cool because the Swooping Hawk Exarch can shoot these guys and deny their overwatch, and then the Warlocks can throw their singing spears and then charge in and finish them off. They only have a 6+ save in combat, so Warlocks being able to always wound on 2+ with their singing spears having damage 3 can really mop these guys up. And the next unit we're talking about is Plague Bearers. So Plague Bearers have very tough defensive stats with an extra wound, of course, because they're Nurgle. They're very slow and not all that great in combat, actually. I think they actually are, if I'm not mistaken, slightly worse than they were before. So their Plague Sword is only Strength User, which is 4, which is not bad, but only AP -2, and hit rolls of a 6 automatically wound the target, which isn't great, considering that their attacks aren't that high. And of course, they're very slow, movement 5. They don't have great weapon skill either. So these guys are probably going to be relegated to holding things in combat and winning through attrition. But in my opinion, Plague Bearers are not the most dangerous or difficult to deal with, and they certainly aren't what they used to be with the disgustingly resilient ability, which basically gave them a 5+ feel no pain. They no longer have that, and honestly, they're a lot less durable because of it. Now, moving on to Tzeentch, we have the Pink Horrors, and the Pink Horrors are a decent shooting unit. They have a good shooting profile, and they're fairly accurate, and they have decent survivability versus shooting, but basically looking at their stats, they don't look that impressive otherwise. So many players might be asking, well, why are they 15 points per model? So here's why. They have this really hilariously funny rule where if you kill one of them after you resolve your attacks, on a 4+, they have the chance to split into 2 blue horrors, which are basically lesser versions of the pink horrors. So basically, each pink horror is replaced with 2 blue horrors, and then furthermore, a blue horror could be split into what's called a brimstone horror. And this makes the unit very hard to take out with a series of attacks. So what is best to kill this unit, you might ask? Well, the best thing to kill this unit would be to debuff it, buff a big unit like Shroud Runners or Warp Spiders or Swooping Hawks or something like that, and just try to kill the unit outright with one powerful shooting attack. Or you can engage this unit in close combat and destroy them that way with a lot of close combat power. So a unit like Striking Scorpions, for example, would be able to come in here, wipe all 10 of them out in one round of combat with the right buffs, and ensure that they cannot split. Because if the unit is fully destroyed, then they can't split into blue horrors, and the blue horrors can't split into brimstone horrors. Because if you try to take these guys out with little things here and there, a little shuriken catapult here, a little shuriken cannon or scatter laser there, you're not going to be able to kill them effectively. So another unit that you guys might see a lot is Seekers. So Seekers are a very fast unit, and the thing you have to worry about when facing these guys is their speed and the potential to charge you from turn 1. So you do have to make sure that you pre-measure out, make sure that your units are not within charge distance turn 1. And these guys are extremely effective at killing enemy units. So these guys have what's called malefic attacks, which basically mean that they get additional attacks on top of their base attacks. And they already have 4 base attacks. So if you add the 2 malefic attacks that they get, you're getting up to a really insane level of attacks. 6 attacks in total. However, these guys are really fragile. They only have 2 wounds and toughness 4. And for a cavalry model that's 20 points, this is quite squishy. So don't expect these guys to stick around for long if you point any shooting at them. But again, they are very devastating if they do get into combat. The good news here, though, is that Seekers, just like any other demon infantry, are susceptible to things like scatter lasers, warp spider, death spinners, swooping hawks, and a lot of other anti-infantry firepower. And just to reiterate, they are going to get +1 to their charge rolls, and this combined with being able to advance in charge via stratagems equates to a really massive threat range that you do need to be careful of when positioning your units in the beginning of the game. And of course, their lesser cousins, the Demonettes, have a lot of attacks and are very fast. 4 attacks base is pretty insane. However, they are very squishy at toughness 3 and 1 wound, which makes them even more susceptible to anti-infantry weapons like shuriken catapults and scatter lasers, of course, being able to wound them on 2s. As long as these guys don't get into combat before they get shot at, they should be fairly easy to take out. However, if you do find yourself in combat with these, you're probably going to have to say goodbye to your unit because they just have so many attacks at a good AP value and a decent strength. So you do have to be careful about these. They will get into combat quickly and they will rip your units to shreds if you don't screen properly. And lastly, we have Big Daddy Be'lakor. So Be'lakor has a massive wounds profile. He does have degrading stats though. His movement, strength, and attacks will degrade over time, which is helpful for making him a little less effective. However, he still has his psychic powers and so forth that he can utilize. He has a fantastic weapon, which is very similar to the Yunkarn. He has a sweep profile and a pierce profile that ignores invul saves with a massive amount of AP. So of course, the piercing strike is the one that ignores invuls and has 4 AP. The sweeping strike only has 3 AP, but makes 2 attacks instead of 1. So his attacks profile will go up to 12 when using this at full strength. He also has a 4+ demon save to both shooting and combat. And lastly, he's 420 points. So he's a big price tag, but he is a psyker and he is well worth the cost. And if that wasn't enough, he has shadow form. This is what makes him extremely hard to kill. So basically, no rerolls on hits, so you can't use guide against this guy. -1 to hit and wound while targeting Be'lakor. You can still doom him though for rerolls to wound. Range attacks are also at -1 damage, so this makes him insanely annoying to destroy. So the typical weapons like scatter lasers, shuriken cannons, things that you might have that's good against infantry, is just not going to cut it when trying to kill Be'lakor. So luckily, we still have D-cannons. D-cannons are still very effective against Be'lakor. They will have a harder time hitting, but they will be still wounding on 4s, and every wound that goes through his demonic save, which to be honest with you isn't that great against range attacks, it's just a 4-up, will be doing considerable damage. And again, the more you damage him, of course, the slower he gets and less of a threat he becomes. Now, when it comes to Be'lakor, I do recommend that if you get the chance to draw a bead to this guy, that you kill him quickly with a combined assault. Things like psychic powers, smite, executioner, things like that can really rack up the damage. Even though smite only does D3 wounds, it's going to be mortal wounds. So it's going to get through his toughness, it's going to get through his special abilities, and of course, it's going to get through his demonic save. And there's a lot of things that deal mortal wounds in our army, D-cannons of course being one of them, but it wouldn't hurt to throw in a few strands of fate dice to ensure that even your rangers can get a couple of mortal wounds on this guy as well. So, kind of as a wrap up to this video, I want to tell you guys some in-game tips and quick counters to demonic units and things to watch out for. So, most importantly, screen your important units with things like Vipers, Wave Serpents, and maybe even Rangers. So you do not want to lose a key unit like your Howling Banshees or your Striking Scorpions to a unit of Demons. A, the Demons cost much less per model and will trade up very effectively. And B, because they're mostly going to be coming out of reinforcements, you're not going to get the chance to strike back. So they're going to charge into you, kill all your Striking Scorpions, Howling Banshees, Dire Avengers, whatever, and then just kind of roll into the next unit if you don't screen properly and if you don't position your units in the correct way. Second, make sure you save command points for the Forewarned stratagem and Overwatch. And keep those Forewarned and Overwatch based units near your other units in your army. The reason why this is because you can use a unit like Shroud Runners or Warwalkers to protect a vulnerable unit that you might think is susceptible to getting charged from the demons via reinforcements, right? So keeping a unit of Warwalkers within 18 inches around of your friendly Howling Banshee unit can be a great way of making your enemy think twice about landing anywhere within 18 inches of your Warwalkers. So make sure you guys have the command point saved for that until he's out of reinforcements, because you do not want to be on the wrong end of a multi-charge situation where your whole army is getting enveloped, overwhelmed, isolated, and of course, destroyed. And also, don't underestimate a guided overwatch. A guided overwatch can be very effective at killing a lot of single wound infantry like Khorne Bloodletters and Demonettes. So again, if they're coming from reserve and they're charging you from reserve, you can still use overwatch, and if you have that unit guided, well, those Demonettes or Khorne Bloodletters are going to be in for a hell of a time. And of course, you're probably not going to be able to kill all of them, but it may be worth the command point just to get them out of the way. And when you combine this with Forewarned, you can actually do significant damage during the enemy turn. Also, watch out for models with the Warp Locust keyword, as they can move up and allow other demonic units to deep strike closer to you. So that example I gave you with Be'lakor. You don't want to allow Be'lakor to be alive until turn 2 or 3. You really don't, if possible, because to be honest with you, if he is, he's going to be able to use that Warp Locust ability to really get units closer to your models so that they can assault right out of reserve. And that's not something you typically want. But also keep in mind that unless your opponent has a strategy in which they have a lot of reserve elements that are coming in with Be'lakor, they're probably not going to want to just throw Be'lakor in front of your army for you to shoot at. So again, it's just something that you have to watch out for, but it's not going to necessarily happen every game. And if you screen your units properly, a good opponent will not try to throw Be'lakor out there anyway. And lastly, keep your units near your Warlocks and Farseers, at least within 24 inches, so that you can deny enemy psychic powers if they come close. So a lot of enemy psychic powers are fairly short range in the Chaos Demon roster. So you want to be near your other units so that you can potentially deny their psychic powers when they try to cast them. So in conclusion, Chaos Demons are a very fast, hard-hitting, and AP resilient army, making them a hard matchup for most forces. However, as Craftworld Eldar, I think we have a lot of tools to deal with a vast majority of their units, and we have the speed to create distance between, so that once we properly screen out their enemy assaults from reinforcements, we can then reposition our army for a better vantage point to be able to shoot them down as they come at us. And as for the objective game, as long as you keep on your secondary objectives and you prevent enemy demon units from being able to take and hold objectives, you should be okay, and you should be in a pretty strong position to win the game. And again, if you played right, a demon army shouldn't really be too much alive at the end of the game. A lot of their units are very fragile. We have a lot of weapons that can be really powerful against them, like scatter lasers, warp spider firepower, swooping hawks, etc. And of course, for their bigger units, we have D cannons, which honestly get around a lot of their defenses. And lastly, if you are careful with positioning, you can evade damage on a lot of your most powerful units. So not only by good positioning, but using screening units to your advantage, you can basically eliminate the threat of enemy reinforcements coming in and overwhelming your forces and then isolating them and destroying them later in the game. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. This was just a quick overview of demons. I realize that different demonic armies have different strategies, and I plan on going into these in later videos. This was just kind of a brief overview of what most demon armies are going to try to do to you. It is going to be slightly different with Nurgle and Tzeentch matchups, because, of course, Tzeentch likes to shoot a lot, and Nurgle likes to hold ground more often than not. But I wanted to give you guys at least a little taste of how Chaos Demons like to play their games and how they operate on the battlefield. All right, everybody, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys next time. As always, leave some comments in the comment section if you think I missed anything or if you have any insight into this matchup that is pertinent, and I will talk to you guys next time. See you later, everybody. Have a good one.